Disney World is currently celebrating its 50th anniversary, and to make it special, there have been many changes to the Florida theme parks, including new rides, shows, scenery, and more. One of the new things is a renovation to the confectionery in the Main Street USA land of the Magic Kingdom. With this came a larger space, more treats, and more of a backstory for the shop. Specifically, a new section was added called the Sweetest Spoon Showcase that had portraits of home bakers. All fictional characters, but there to give some story to the shop and the residents of Main Street. One of the featured characters is Saul Fitz, a tailor who spends his free time baking. And next to his portrait, you can see a quote from Gary Henderson, his partner. Sure, it's a vague gesture, and I would rather not go down the first Cape Blanc rabbit hole again, but I'm happy to see Saul there. But you can see the title of this video. It's complicated, but so is Main Street USA.
The Walt Disney Company released a brief statement concerning the recently announced boycott. Quote, "We are proud that the Disney brand creates more family entertainment of every kind than anyone else in the world."
How many Christians are taking their kids off to see the movie Frozen, produced by an organization that is probably one of the strongest pro-homosexual organizations in the country? You wonder if maybe there's something very evil happening here, Steve.
Look at tolerance as the supreme ethic of this generation.
And when Disneyland brings people in drag, men and women, French kissing in front of the boys and girls at Disneyland, it's hard for us to take families there when Disneyland is pushing the homosexual lifestyle.
On June 18, 1997, the Southern Baptist Convention announced a boycott of Disney. The Disney Company are increasingly promoting immoral ideologies such as homosexuality, infidelity, and adultery, which are biblically reprehensible and abhorrent to God. We encourage Southern Baptists to refrain from patronizing any company that promotes immoral ideologies and practices. What were they referring to? Well, there were a few things going on at the time that triggered this. Ellen DeGeneres had recently come out on her TV show, Disney had started offering employee benefits to same-sex couples, Gay Days was a regular, unofficial, but still permitted occurrence at the Disney parks, and from the perspective of the Southern Baptist Convention, it was clear that the gay agenda was taking hold. The boycott was also a continuation of a 1996 resolution that they passed. A resolution regarding these issues with a specific appeal to the Disney Company, which had long been a respected leader of family entertainment in keeping with traditional moral values. I think it would be easy to write off the Southern Baptist Convention as an organization that isn't as concerned with Disney's morals as much as they are against queer rights. Because at the end of the day, the whole setup of the boycott shows that they are fans. And in one way, they're also technically right. Historically, Disney has been a leader of family entertainment that has kept with quote-unquote traditional moral values. And that wording is supposed to be vague. Walt Disney was a very patriotic, conservative man who wanted to create family entertainment for mainstream US culture, so Disney often appealed to that culture, which is why we even have areas like Main Street in the first place. But let's put a pin in that. We'll return to it later. Vague phrases like traditional moral values can be unsettling for queer people, because for as long as queerness has been a thing, it's also been demonized as a threat that disrupts the status quo. And though the Southern Baptist Convention's boycott ended after being unsuccessful, the idea of queer people being at odds with Disney's brand of family entertainment is to this day a contentious topic among fans. As someone growing up in the early 2000s on message boards and forums, I kind of just accepted that. If I wanted to talk about Disney online with people who knew a lot about it, I had to separate that from the part of me that was discovering what it means to be gay and trans. Though I met many wonderful, friendly people on those boards, some of whom I keep in touch with to this day, I was always one thread about Gay Days away from getting into an argument with someone who didn't want their family to be quote-unquote tainted by the LGBTQ agenda. And in most situations, the thread would be closed, not because of the queerphobia, but instead because it was supposedly hard to moderate a contentious issue that has more than one side. It's a bummer when just being yourself is so contentious, especially when the same people sharing your love for The Little Mermaid are also the same people who would be against the queer people behind it. Which brings us to the Main Street Confectionery, because though I didn't see as much outward hatred as I did back in the 2000s, I don't think that's because hatred has left the community. In fact, the lack of outrage seems more due to the fact that the partner detail was so small and vague that without the normal fanfare of Disney's first gay blank, the people who it would upset didn't notice. But rest assured, I also saw plenty of the anger I expected. While writing this video though, something happened. I wanted to get a screenshot of a particularly inflammatory and queerphobic post on a prominent Disney Parks fan site that has always stuck in my head over the years. But I couldn't find it. Wondering if I was making it up or if I just had the wrong site, I went back through old research to find that no, I wasn't wrong. I had the right page. However, the entire site was redone, and after a deep search, any mentions of LGBTQ events or merch were exclusively positive. The same thing happened with other sites, too. The most vitriolic cases that came to mind when thinking of queerphobic Disney fan sites were gone. Findable thanks to the Wayback Machine, but otherwise scrubbed clean. Like many prejudices, queerphobia can be something that's both conscious and subconscious. I was raised in a pretty conservative environment filled with queerphobia, and as I've grown up, I've seen those around me do the work to untangle that. Hell, part of what made growing up so difficult for me was having to liberate myself from the queerphobia I was taught. I'm fully capable of making videos addressing specific people or movements that I feel are causing harm to the queer community, and I mean, I've done that before. But I think when talking about queerness and Disney, I don't really see the point of going back in time to take someone to task for something they've already changed on. Among Disney fans especially, what's more concerning to me is the large amount of well-meaning people who want to show up and advocate for LGBTQ rights and representation, but don't know enough about it to effectively argue against homophobic Disney fans. So let me help with that. There wouldn't have been a gay person on Main Street. Why do we have to insert modern social justice into everything? Well, for starters, there absolutely were gay people in the early 1900s. They probably wouldn't have called themselves gay in the modern sense, nor would they have been accepted in mainstream society. But regardless of if their queerness was on public display, make no mistake about it, they were there. The words back then to describe it were not nearly as popular or the same as our modern senses of sexual and gender identity, but they existed. And before the German word homosexuality was coined in the late 1800s, there wasn't even really a common word in English to describe queerness that wasn't conflated with deviant morality, predatory behavior, or stereotypes. Yeah, exactly. Nobody would have been out and proud as gay on Main Street in the early 1900s. Isn't Main Street USA about historical accuracy? Yes and no. Remember when I talked about Walt Disney wanting to create family entertainment for mainstream US culture? Well, that's what Main Street is. But to be more specific, it represents Walt's childhood, which did represent mainstream US culture of the time, but a specific kind. A white, cisgender, and heteronormative culture. Main Street USA, Walt Disney's fictionalized throwback to his own childhood, functions as an American anchor in a mythic white middle-class time gone by, represented quote-unquote as it should have been, in relation to imaginary and highly ideological constructions of both history and geography. In other words, it wasn't made for everyone, and as a result, the romantic, nostalgic vibe of Main Street isn't for everyone. And just to clarify, I do know that not all iterations of Main Street are meant to represent the same time period or location, but most of them do stem from Walt Disney's nostalgic view of his childhood and idealized versions of late 19th and early 20th century US culture. My favorite part of Disney parks is the music. After all, Disney music is the focus of this channel, and nothing quite immerses you like the music played on Main Street. However, its historical accuracy is shaky, depending on how literal you want to be. When listening, you'd think that it was authentic music from the early 1900s, but songs from Oklahoma, The Music Man, Summer Magic, Meet Me in St. Louis, and Hello Dolly are all heard in the background or during shows on Florida's Main Street, despite the fact that they were all written in the mid-20th century. However, all of them are from shows or movies set during that time period, which is why they fit the general aesthetic. A song that is not from the time period nor set during the time period, though, is Married Life from Up, which was probably included just because it sounds like an old-timey song already, so when it was adapted for a ragtime band, it only added to that effect. Like a lot of music at Disney parks, the songs played on Main Street aren't meant to be 100% authentic. Even aside from what I've already mentioned, the Dapper Dans will frequently sing modern songs, whether they're Disney melodies or not.
Baby, you light up my world like nobody else.
So historical accuracy is not important. Instead, what's more important is that the songs create a feeling. They give off the idea of Main Street USA. Like sound designer Greg Meader mentioned in my video about Disney Parks music, sometimes in order to immerse guests, you focus not on what's authentic, but what people think is authentic. While working on Tower of Terror, a ride specifically about a haunted elevator, it became clear that the regular elevator sounds wouldn't cut it. Though the sounds he recorded were authentic, they didn't translate. They weren't recognizable as elevator sounds.
The real sound just doesn't have any it just doesn't work. I mean, it's the real sound, but it doesn't sound right. Do you want it to sound like a gunshot, or do you want it to sound like a Hollywood gunshot? Mm-hmm. And, it's just a real gunshot doesn't sound anything like what you hear in the movies, generally.
So Main Street does have a lot of historical accuracy to it, but that's not the same thing as being entirely accurate. It's the balance of suggestion and history that makes the theming at Disney parks feel so unique and immersive. Sure, not everything has to be 100% accurate, but why are we rewriting history? I don't really understand this question, because I don't understand exactly which part of Main Street USA is history. I mean, like I've said, it depicts an idealized version of a time period, but it's not like Main Street is a living museum or anything. If you want to talk about actually rewriting history, just look at the Disney movie The Peter Tchaikovsky Story from 1959. Sure, it tells the story of Tchaikovsky, but it completely leaves out the fact that he was gay, something that not only drove his personal life, but is essential for understanding his music. Because Tchaikovsky's music was often written in response to lovers he had, understanding his sexuality helps you understand his career. But you wouldn't know that if you just saw the Disney movie.
Peter was in love. He knew that all the eligible males of St. Petersburg were at the feet of the divine soprano.
Though it's true that Tchaikovsky said that Desiree Artaud was the only woman he loved, the framing of him as a straight person is, well, rewriting history, and leaving out an important part of understanding why he wrote the music that he did. And when the Russian government today still rewrites the history of Tchaikovsky's sexuality, it's clear that rewriting history can be used to erase queer people from it. So when being a little more explicit with a gay person in an idealized fictional version of Main Street, I wonder, is actual history being erased, or is your idealized version of it being erased? What's all this drama about a gay character anyway? Doesn't it just say partner under the quote? What if it's his business partner? This feels a bit disingenuous. I was raised in the US, and I've never heard anyone refer to their business partner as simply their partner outside of a business setting. This feels less like an actual question and more just playing devil's advocate. Of course people have business partners, but are you really trying to argue that in the situation of a hobby baker being advertised at a local confectionery, it makes more sense for partner to refer to a business partner instead of a life partner?
Why does this matter? Why does everything have to be gay nowadays? Queer people didn't make everything about being queer. Society did. When you have groups of people oppressed for centuries for no reason other than just existing, it's not surprising to me that one way of overcoming that is by just taking up space anyway. And in a society that assumes you are cis or straight unless you say something, being explicit about your identity is the most effective way to not allow yourself to be subjected to society's assumptions. I know I'm not alone in wanting to live in a world where coming out isn't something that has to happen every day to every new person you meet, but that's not the world we live in. I think it's possible to continue pushing for that world while also working with what we've got. The problem with Main Street isn't that it fails to portray a certain time period, it's that it fails to not portray it. When many people think of the early 20th century US, they think of Main Street. Today, Disney refers to Main Street as a nostalgic version of the past, and there are definitely a lot of people who see it as that, but mainstream US society often doesn't. Emotion is often the driving force behind history, and as a result, fictionalized, nostalgic versions of the past are more familiar than realistic ones. I mean, that's why concepts like freedom and liberty for everyone are still argued as being integral to US identity, despite the fact that there has never been a point in US history where that's really been the case. People keep pushing for idealized versions of US history, and that's why Disney's version of Main Street becomes equal to their version of a country that's always pushing for idealism. So, people make music for new movies sound like ragtime songs and play them on Main Street. And then they cherry-pick parts of history that make them feel comfortable, regardless of whether or not they represent everyone. Having a gay person be a part of Main Street's story is helpful. Sure, it injects a little bit of modern vocab into the setting, but it also portrays the past, the fact that queer people have always and will always be there. And for the other characters also added who are Black, Native American, and of other backgrounds without enough representation on Main Street, it shows other parts of US culture of the time to create a more comprehensive view of the country. The French philosopher Louis Marron once said that Disneyland is an immense and displaced metaphor of the system of representations and values unique to American society. And he wasn't wrong. Most of the iterations of Main Street around the world are like this, but it's important to understand that the representations and values are from specific perspectives. When talking about social justice and progressive politics, there's usually a focus on the future. But as I continue advocating for queer rights, I'm reminded of the fact that I'm not only trying to make the world a better place, but also make sure that queer history isn't forgotten. Continue keeping the spirits of those who came before me alive by not letting those who tried to forget them win. And when we do that, the past becomes a tool to make a better future that strives for idealism without getting caught up in biased fairy tales. So fixing Main Street isn't about rewriting the past, it's about creating our future.
Day
I'm half crazy, all for the love of you. It won't be a stylish marriage, I can't afford a carriage, but you'll look sweet on the seat of a bicycle built for two.